variety of Queen Victoria varieties. Fairly straightforward. We're going to look at some of the earlier stuff. We're going to look at a missent letter, a turned folded letter. It's a new expression that I didn't know what it was until I learned about it. Some majors on the 4 cent on the 3 penny beaver, an OHMS one, and then some large queen varieties, cracked plate, shaving queen, shaving neck, goatee, and some more cracked plates, and then a bunch of small queen stuff. And finally, we'll end up with a Jubilee double and triple ghost printing. So this first one is a missent. It was mailed from Barrie on May 1st of 42, no postage, of course. Then it was addressed to London, England, but it went to London, Upper Canada.
Wow.
So it was canceled on May 5th there. They returned it back to Barrie, where it was canceled again on May 12th. And then finally it did arrived in London, UK, and backstamped June 14th. So an interesting missent letter.
Where is Barrie?
Barrie is about an hour north of Toronto.
Oh, okay.
And London is about an hour and a half west of Toronto. This is a 3 penny beaver on a turned folded letter addressed to the Honorable A. Fraser Field. And what if it's a split ring Creemore Hills, which is a small town southern Ontario, and the manuscript cancel of December 31st. It's the earliest recorded date and the only recorded example for that post office from 1849 to 62. And here's the letter. Creemore Mills to the Honorable A. Fraser. He was quite a famous person in the local community, and it's signed by Mr. Webster. And then Alexander Fraser writes on it, has his letter to the bottom and signs it Alexander. So he's forwarded this entire letter, and he's added his own paid stamps, paid Alexander Fraser, and a paid 3 postage mark, and canceled the whim. So the term the turned letter means the letter was used and sent one way, with, in this case, and then was the recipient, the addressee, turned around and forwarded it onto Mr. Pringle in Hamilton. Now, who was the Fraser? He was he was a commanding officer of the Glengarry Militia, also Justice of the Peace, a politician. So the extensive land holdings, the details in the letters are interesting to read, but as they are in all those letters of that, many letters of that period, it does relate to money and loans. And in this letter, he pleads with Mr. Pringle, who's obviously in the judiciary somewhere, not to arrest Mr. Webster, because Mr. Webster owes Mr. Fraser some money. But so he says, don't pay, don't force the issue with him. Here's the 4-penny beaver with a major reentry from position 47 on pane A, also relating to money. He pleads this case that he can't pay his money. He'll have to wait till next April. But we're looking at the major reentry there. We've seen this cover before in an earlier Pence presentation, but I wanted to highlight this is position 47 on pane A. And here it is on position 61, also the major. But it's not quite this. Instead of it being a doubling above the E of 3 pence, it's actually a doubling of the border frame, the frame line underneath it right here. We still see the doubling of the E. We don't see it as strong as in the top 3s, although the Unitrade catalog says it is on all 4 3s. I'm not quite convinced that it certainly isn't the same as on this one. So, but that's position 61 on the pane. Here's an OHMS letter to Queen Victoria. Here, manuscript up in the top is OHMS to honor Majesty service.
Do you know what does honor Majesty service mean?
Well, what it should have been 2 words. It should have been on Her Majesty's service.
Oh, whoa.
Which is what we would see if any government mail government mail that was sent from the tax department to someone else, it would be an OHMS. And there are many
Uh-huh.
stamps that have an OHMS overprint, which means it's government mail and they don't have to pay postage. The Glen Nevis Canada West split ring cancel from 66. It's endorsed, OHMS free, but 1840 Queen Victoria waived her OHMS privileges, postage was required. Black manuscript 8 would have been applied if it's sent from Quebec on a Quebec steamer. There's the explanation of it. There's someone else suggested too. There was also Portsmouth had an 8-penny incoming ship letter fee, and so that 8 has two possibilities as to why it's there. But it is backstamped London, and so it did actually make it to London. Whether or not the Queen actually read it in 1866, we'll never know. And it was supposed to go first on the Allen line via the Canadian steamer. It didn't make it to Quebec in time. So then it was shipped over to New York and came on it missed the St. David and came on the Cunard RMS Persia instead. And that's how we know the arrival. And so it was just late leaving Quebec and came on a different ship. This book, particular cover, is illustrated in some interesting literature on the subject of fines on transatlantic mail. Continuing now, we're going on to the large queens and the cracked plate. So we have here number 25V, which the crackings occurred in NTS. We'll look at them in close in a second. And here it is a crack. This one goes right from here, right up into the top. We'll see that in a second too, and close up. And we have a third version. They're all listed as 25 in the Unitrade catalog as 25V, and they do say there's three plate cracks. And this one's in the upper left margin. So when we're looking at the NTS, we can see a plate crack coming through here like that on that single. And here we see a plate crack that starts in the sea of cents, loses a little bit there, but it continues right up through under the nose and up through and comes out here under the E of 3. And here's another one. It's in the left margin. This isn't quite as distinct as most cracks. Cracks are usually, this almost looks like a guideline, but it's way too fat for a guideline. So it's not as quite a definitive crack as I'm sure. This one isn't illustrated in Unitrade. These two are illustrated in Unitrade. Here we have the cracked plate on the top stamping a pair on cover. That's my particular passion, is collecting varieties on cover. And here we can see it coming down through here, through the T, and then curling into the S of cents. The shaving nick variety, this is a subtle one. This is a small dot and a small dark streak here on a single. And that's what it looks like it close up. And they also list in Unitrade a separate catalog number, a goatee variety, which is in the same area of the chin, but it's quite a different kind of mark. It's not the distinct straight line that we associate with a shaving nick. And that's the comparison there. This is a shaving nick on a cover to none other than Sir Sanford Fleming. And here's the example. Here's the nick here. And Sir Sanford Fleming was the chief engineer involved in designing the railways across Canada. He also developed the various plans. He was a chief government surveyor. You can see the CE here for chief engineer in Halifax. Here's his residence on Brunswick Street from 1866 to 71. This was mailed in 69. Sir Sanford Fleming is more important for philatelists because he also designed our first stamp, the 3-penny paper. And so this is a particularly interesting cover addressed to Sir Sanford Fleming and with an interesting variety on it. Here we're going more crack plates on position 65 on 29 IV and 30. They're both Queen Victoria 15-cent stamps. They only make a distinction in they assign them different catalog numbers because one is a gray violet and one is a gray color. So it's just a subtle difference in the color. And for whatever reason, they've decided to give it two separate numbers. But the plate crack, of course, appears on both colors. The same plate was used for both printings. What we're looking at is right there on that stamp, and here on that stamp. It's that plate. It actually continues on to position 64 too. Here we have an interesting misperf with, as you can see, a row of perforations right down the middle of Queen Victoria's neck. And in the description from the auction house that I bought it from, they said it's quite rare. And they said they're only aware of one other example. Here we're looking at another small queen variety. There are many re-entries on this issue, and that's included in other presentations. But here we're looking at an unusual wide and narrow spacing. And there's also a major in position 10. I didn't include it here. But what we're looking at here is the wide and narrow spacing. On the left there in position 7, I think, yeah, 7. It is a very wide spacing, about 16% wider than the narrow spacing on position 8. It's an unusual one, and that's why I collect it. Here's the strand of hair variety. The strand of hair variety on the one set is quite popular. There's 3 different versions of it, and here we're going to look at this one right here. And I'll flip it upside down. That's what you're looking at right there. There's short, and long, 3 lengths of this hair, perhaps due to plate wear. This is more likely what's called a misplaced entry. That curvature resembles the curvature of the top of the frame line. So it could have been the die was improperly positioned or touched the plate first in a place where it wasn't supposed to be touched. So that's more of a misplaced entry than a re-entry. Postal stationery. Some people like postal stationery. This is the broken wave. This interesting variety right up here. What you're looking at is, well, just as it's described, the wave in the Canada. Now, the good news is all varieties on postal stationery on cover, so it fits nicely in the collection. It is a constant, so it's not my finding. There are other copies available. Here's a crown overprint. Now, this is an unusual one because here someone has applied their own overprint. I'm a royalist who strongly believes in the crown and decided, well, I'm going to put a nice black overprint on top. Went through the mails, and but it's an unusual overprint for sure.
Have you seen it before? Is this the only one you know
That's
of?
the only one I've ever seen, and at the presentation when I gave it last week to the Specialist Society, Specialist Group in Toronto, no one had ever seen it either. Oh, this is a trisect. We've talked about bisects on covers before. This is a trisect. There's 3 segments down here, right there, and when you put them all together, they do actually came from the same stamp. And that is apparently a common procedure to verify that the signatures are genuine. There are other Canadian documents. They don't necessarily use the stamp. They use the salvage from the stamps, interestingly. This is the first one I've seen with actually a trisect on documents. Here we have the 10-cent imperf hair, red-brown shade on cover, to England with an oval R stamp. Unfortunately, there's no date on the front. It was registered. The back stamp shows London and 30th of August 2006. That would suggest to me that it could easily have been philatelic. This is out of period, really, for the large queen issue. And the fact that there's a nice crease down the middle of the envelope would suggest that he sent it over to someone in England and turned around, and then somebody in England turned around and sent it right back, centering on the beautiful imperf pair. But they are listed in the catalog, so they do exist. But this might just be a very beautiful philatelic example of it. Here we're looking at the powder blue shade of the 50-cent Jubilee. And when we look closely at it, we'll see there's a very distinct double printing. The T is, you can see there's an extra a ghost printing. And this sparked some discussion at the meeting because here's also a triple printing. And so the question I was asking, is it really a triple or is it two prints off-centered, with this being the edge of the T, for example, on the 1, and this being the, so then what I did was I looked at the 50, And if you look at the width of the T, I couldn't be convinced that this mark and this mark didn't come from three different printings. I don't know. But the T in the middle is pretty thick. The F, so maybe it's a double printing with dramatic coverage on both sides, or a triple printing. We don't know. Okay, and I think that concludes the presentation. In Canada, we can send letters to our member of parliament addressed to Ottawa free of charge. If you have some complaint or something you want to voice an opinion on, you can send letters to our members of parliament in Canada free.